Good evening, audience and participants. Welcome to this forum, What a Difference a DA Makes. I am Suzanne Brock, the current president of the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area. I have just a couple announcements to make before we begin. This program is a nonpartisan event, having no discussion of possible candidates. Although media accounts have recently mentioned some who may be considering running for this office, this event is in no way intended to endorse anyone. And we ask everyone to please refrain from doing so in the chat or the Q&A spaces. For the audience during the presentation, please use the Q&A function to submit questions for the presenters. The Q&A will be monitored for this purpose. You may use the chat function for any comments that you wish to share with the group or with each other. What a Difference a DA Makes is a public education campaign launched by the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts to highlight the key role that the Commonwealth's district attorneys play in determining the effectiveness and the fairness of the criminal legal system, who may be qualified to become a district attorney, and ways to hold the district attorneys accountable. This evening's goal is to inform and educate Massachusetts residents so that they may be more aware and engaged in their local district attorney elections. This forum is the work of a collaboration of groups from Cape Cod and the islands, whose goal is to help educate voters so that they may make more informed decisions in the voting booth. Those sponsoring groups are the Cape Cod Coalition of Communities, the Cape Cod and the Martha's Vineyard branches of the NAACP, the Martha's Vineyard branches of the Cape Cod of the League of Women Voters, and the Cape Cod branch of the League of Women Voters, and the Martin Luther King Action Team of the Nauset Interfaith Association. Locally, Michael O'Keefe, the current district attorney for the Cape and Islands region, has announced that he will not run for re-election. District Attorney O'Keefe has held this position for 20 years. And so this is the first time in a long time that the voters will have a choice. With so much emphasis today on criminal justice reform, it is imperative that voters are made aware of the importance of the district attorney in the criminal justice process. Because district attorneys are elected, they are accountable only to the voters. In that light, we would ask you to join us in listening and learning how we, the voters, can be a pivotal part of this process. At this time, I would like to introduce Jean Morrison, one of the program vice presidents for the Cape Cod League, as well as an integral member of many other community organizations, two of which are the Cape Cod branch of the NAACP and the MLK Action Team of the Nauset Association, Interfaith Association. Good evening, Jean.
Jean, you're muted.
The etiquettes of Zoom. I apologize. Thank you, Suzanne, and welcome everyone. Let me introduce you first to Olivia Santoro. She is the ACLU of Massachusetts Community Outreach Strategist who works with ACLU volunteers and members and their coalition partners to build power for the ACL's Q advocacy priorities, of which this program is one. Olivia has been instrumental in helping to organize and schedule this program and connect us to the best presenter to meet our needs. She has been an invaluable technical support to Richard Utt, the communications chair for the League of Women Voters Cape Cod area, who is the technical administrator for us this evening. And she will assist Richard with technical support and will also be monitoring the chat for comments as a reminder, and as well the Q&A feature where you should add your questions as Suzanne has instructed. Karen Bojukos from the MLK Action Team will assist her. Olivia will facilitate the participant Q&A at the end of the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter for this evening, Whitney Taylor. Whitney is the ACLU of Massachusetts Political Director. Whitney joined the ACLU of Massachusetts in May of 2010 to help develop statewide presence of ACLU supporters and activists who advocate on behalf of civil liberties. As a national expert on illicit drug policy, the criminal justice and public health systems, voter education campaigns, and the electoral ballot initiatives and legislative process. She coordinates the development and implementation of the ACLU of Massachusetts public advocacy agenda. Whitney has helped to build and lead multiple campaigns in her career at the ACLU. She was the director of the successful 2008 Massachusetts marijuana decriminalization campaign and consultant to the successful 2012 Massachusetts medical marijuana initiative, the 2016 marijuana legalization campaign, the 2018 transgender ballot questions, and what a difference a DA makes, and the passage of the 2020 Roe Act for reproductive justice, to name a few. Whitney received a BA in criminal justice and an MS in public policy from American University in Washington, DC. Welcome, Whitney. We're excited to hear from you tonight.
Thank you so much, everybody. And, it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. And before I pass it over to Liv to start, I also just wanted to say how excited I am to be here with the Cape and Islands community. My folks, my dad and my stepmother live in Orleans, and my extended family are in Orleans, Brewster, Eastham, and Chatham. So I know Mid-Cape really, really well, and I know the Cape well. So it's like coming home. And actually I have to say winter is my favorite time on the Cape. So, you'll be seeing me down there even, even though COVID's happening. So I'm glad we're here in this space today, but I hope to be in space with you in person all soon.
All right, thank you, Whitney. Sorry, I just muted myself. I'm going to go ahead here and share my screen so that everybody can see the presentation that we have prepared for you tonight. I just want to say, first off, thank you to this amazing group of partners for organizing this. I'm so thrilled with the turnout. We've got 105 people here, which is just absolutely incredible. To reiterate a couple of things that have already been said, we are going to use that Q&A feature for questions. We'll have a designated segment at the end, but we will try to take some along the way. So feel free to pop those into the Q&A box. And then we hope you'll use the chat box for any comments or reactions that you have throughout this webinar. And because we're doing this in webinar format, we can't necessarily see each other, but we would really love to hear from you. And so if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box, let us know who you are and where you're calling in from. That would be wonderful. So as Whitney said, we're really thrilled to be here tonight to talk with you about the ACLU's What a Difference a DA Makes campaign. And we launched this campaign in 2018 to educate voters about the role that district attorneys play in our criminal legal system. Starting, of course, with the fact that district attorneys are elected officials. And we launched this campaign because DAs can make life-changing decisions for thousands of people across the state, but many people are not familiar with the full scope of their role, or just simply that they are elected. DAs are, answerable to you, the voters, and so it's really important for all of you to understand what they do. And making this information transparent and accessible was really our goal for this campaign. And so it's great for us to be here virtually on the Cape and Islands with all of you as we approach the 2022 elections. And just want to reiterate that this is a public education campaign. The ACLU is nonpartisan, and we don't endorse candidates or political parties, but we do talk to voters about values, and we hope that this presentation really helps you feel more empowered and prepared when you go and vote for DA this coming November. So before I turn it to Whitney, I just want to take a moment to ask all of you a few questions. And so if you'll indulge me for just a few moments, this really awesome PowerPoint program that we're using allows us to do some interactive question and answer. And so I'm going to put a couple of questions for you up on the screen, and all of you can type in the answers to those questions by either following the instructions on the screen or following a link that I'm going to put for you in the chat box. So if you go to menti.com, that's MENTI.com, and you plug in that access code that's on the screen, 85633068, or if you use that QR code, it'll bring you to those question slides in just a moment. And to make it really simple, I'm going to put into the chat box the direct link that you can just bring up in your web browser. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our first question, and hopefully folks who are accessing that site, following that link, are going to be able to see this question pop up on your screen. And if you're having trouble, let me know in the chat box. And what I love about this is that we can see the answers come in together. And this first question for all of you is, do you think that the criminal justice system in Massachusetts is working or not? So I can already see some answers coming in. I'm going to give folks just a few moments to go ahead and do that. And just in case that link gets lost in the chat, I'm going to pop it in there again in case you weren't able to grab it.
Liv, could you give the code again? Just so I saw it some splash by.
Yes, let me, I just realized that I don't have the code memorized. I'm going to go back here really quickly. There it is. Thank you, Karen. And yes, Christine, it is at the top of the page. Thank you. It's currently blocked on mine because it says I'm screen sharing. All right, we got about half the crowd weighing in here. I'm going to give everyone just a few more moments to get the hang of this. All right, so as the results are coming in, it looks like we've got 50%, 56, 57% of our group here thinks that the criminal justice system is not working in Massachusetts. We've got 9%, 8% fluctuating back and forth of folks who say that the system is working. And then we've got 33% of folks who are just not sure if the criminal justice system is working or not. So I really appreciate you all weighing in here, because I hope that by the end of this presentation, it will sort of help clarify this answer for you. And this is actually a question that we also posed to a group of general voters in the state. And when we get a little farther into the presentation, we're going to share those results with you as well. So I'm going to move us on to the next question, which is, do you think the criminal justice system in Massachusetts works the same for everyone, or does it work differently for different people? And again, I'll give everybody a few moments to answer that one. All right, as the results are coming in, we can see from our chart here that an overwhelming amount of folks on the call think that the criminal justice system works differently for different people. And we at the ACLU certainly agree with that. And we're gonna talk a little bit more today about how that is in fact the case and the different ways that it is. All right, and our last question here before I kick it to Whitney is, what percentage of DA races do you think went uncontested in the last 20 years? And we've got some options here for you. And so we're curious for you all to weigh in and tell us what you think your perception is of how many have gone uncontested. Right, we're neck and neck here. 77% and 92% are the most popular answers so far. This is for the entire state, so across Massachusetts. All right, so we're pretty neck and neck here with 77% and 92%. And the correct answer is in fact 77%. Over the last 20 years, 70% of DA races went uncontested across the state. And that's really an astounding number of district attorney races. And when these races go uncontested, that often means that we're not getting any public dialogue about what kind of policies the DA candidates support. And that can contribute to a lack of transparency. And so one of our hopes with this campaign is that would it also encourage more candidates to run for office so that we could have that public debate and that public dialogue about the best policies and the best practices. So how does the Cape and Islands stack up against those sort of general stats for across the state? And you may be familiar with this or maybe not. And since 2002, 3 out of the 5 DA elections went uncontested. And your sitting DA, O'Keefe, who's not running for re-election, had just one primary challenger in the last 20 years. So that might not be surprising to some of you, but it may to others. And if it does surprise you, that doesn't surprise us, because we know that a lot of people just are not familiar with the role of the DA because there's a real lack of dialogue. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Whitney to really dive into our program here and tell us more about the Massachusetts criminal legal system.
Thanks so much, Liv. I really appreciate it. And again, welcome everybody. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Massachusetts criminal legal system. First, I just do want to share that we at the ACLU call it the criminal legal system and not the criminal justice system, because we believe there is not justice in it yet. So this is the legal structure by which we deal with our society and crime. So I wanted to talk a little bit, because the first thing people say is, well, what does the data say? How do we compare? How do we compare to other states? How do we compare to everything? I wanted to start first with one of the major problems we have in Massachusetts for actually all of our systems, but even more inherently in the criminal legal system, because there are multiple different types of offices, some elected, some appointed, that are all part of the criminal legal system. Data collection in Massachusetts, just to say it, stinks. There are not standards or practices across offices. So all the DA offices do not collect the same types of information in the same way. All the sheriff's offices, all of the public defender's offices. Then you can go into any other issue, social services, any of those issues, data is not being collected the right way. And then when the data is being collected, the government is not willing to share it. In Massachusetts, we have one of the worst public record laws in the country, and that is after a major reform movement that the ACLU and the Newspaper Association, actually, of Massachusetts worked on in the early teens, the early 20-teens, for several years, and which we got our public records law to be better. But for example, the state legislature still isn't subject to it. So you can't do a public records request to the state legislature. Where this really comes into culmination, and when I wanted to talk about it, especially in this context, is in Massachusetts, there was this opportunity. In 2015, the Council of State Governments, which is a national nonprofit, said that it would come to Massachusetts and actually look at our criminal legal system and look at the data and say, how is it working? Where can you improve? The first thing that we learned about this process was that the administration, the Baker administration, who invited them in, refused to share any race data with the Council of State Governments. So the entire report that came out in 2017 about what we should do in our criminal legal system in Massachusetts did not talk about race. And that is a crime. And that is a huge problem. And so when I start talking about these numbers that I'm going to share with you, some of them, please know that they are hard fought to find, and that we at the ACLU understand how frustrating it must be for the general voter. I mean, I work at the ACLU. I have a bunch of lawyers. And by the way, I want to share, I'm not a lawyer. I may play one on TV. I may act like one, but I'm not a lawyer. And but I work with lawyers who, when we are told we can't get data, can do the months and years of work to sue to get that information. But there is some information. We have a wonderful, actually, research organization based here in Massachusetts called the Prison Policy Initiative. And they've had some really great numbers that I wanted to do some comparison of our criminal legal system. So Massachusetts, we incarcerate approximately 275 people per 100,000. Now, the rest of the if you look at the United States average, which is not something anybody wants to compare themselves to, that's up at 675 people per 100,000. So, you know, people say, oh, well, we're doing great for the United States. The United States should never be bragging about our criminal legal system. Let's compare ourselves to the United Kingdom. The entire United Kingdom has 129 people per 100,000. So almost half for the United Kingdom versus Massachusetts. And I just wanted to kind of, let folks know the gravity and the depth of the type of incarceration that we do in Massachusetts. Additionally, some of the things that happen in our system is if we don't lean in with different types of responses, if we just continue somebody did something wrong, let's put them in handcuffs, let's put them behind bars, let's never get to the root issues, let's never deal with what's actually going on, we're going to continue to see these cycles of people being incarcerated and not being productive members of their community. And in fact, in Massachusetts, 74% of people who have been sentenced have a prior conviction. So the system has now failed them once, and we're now failing them again on how bringing them back. 40% of people in jails in our houses of correction have prior sentences within the houses of correction. And not only previous, but within the last 3 years. So these are people that are cycling through very quickly. And then finally, when we talk about our incarceration rates that are still very, very high, they pale in comparison to the number of people that are actually under supervision of the system, because you can be behind bars in a state prison, you can be behind bars in a house of correction, you can be behind bars in a federal prison. But then you have things like probation and parole. And we currently have over 1,300 people per 100,000 in Massachusetts under supervision of the criminal legal system. So that means if they hang out with the wrong person, or if they drink alcohol and they're not supposed to because it's a term of their probation, or they travel to a certain place, there's all these rules that are tied to probation. We're setting them up to fail. Let's also then dive down a little bit deeper to people who are suffering from mental health and substance abuse issues, who are chronic, either chronic, not just relapsing into their mental health and substance abuse issues. And then what do? We go, oh, you relapsed? That means you go behind bars. What we want to do at the ACLU and in our conversations with the leaders of our criminal legal system is we need to do something different. And district attorneys are one of the primary leaders of how our criminal legal system works in Massachusetts. And we as the voters now need to ask them. We need to not ask them, we need to tell them what our values are. And the values are our values of making people productive members of their community, making sure people aren't treated differently dependent on the color of their skin or how much money they have in their wallet, and that we can actually work toward a healthier, safer Commonwealth. So I just wanted to kind of lay out that kind of the structure of the criminal legal system where we are now. And I'd love to pass it, to give you that context. So now you can pass it. I wanted to pass it back to Liv to talk about the Office of District Attorney, basically the driver of how our criminal legal system operates. Liv?
Thanks, Whitney. Before we get into that, I just want to share some data that we collected before we launched our campaign in 2018, because we wanted to get a sense of what general voters knew about the criminal legal system. And Whitney provided a really good framework for all of you to get us started. And we wanted to just see where the general public was. And so you'll recognize these two first questions because I posed those to all of you. And so I think it's interesting now to compare that a little bit to the folks who were polled when we released this. And so about half of the voters that were polled think the criminal justice system is working. So that's more than folks thought in this group. And nearly 3/4 think it works differently for different people. And so that's pretty close, right? People across the board have this sense that the color of your skin or how much money you have in your pocket is impacting how the criminal legal system treats you. Our next couple of statements here revealed that Massachusetts also, again, broadly agreed that there is a race and income bias in the criminal justice system. And they think that there should be something done about that. So here on the left, 88% of people think that Massachusetts should in fact work to change the criminal justice system so that people are not treated differently based on who they know. And 84% of voters thought that Massachusetts should work to change the criminal justice system so that people are not treated differently based on the color of their skin. So there's certainly this appetite, right, among people across Massachusetts to do things differently in our state. We also learned from this poll that half believe that individual DAs have only a minor or insignificant impact on the criminal justice system. So of course, this was really interesting to us because we see the DA as a really powerful player. And so it was interesting to see that more than half thought it was either just a minor impact or it doesn't really matter who the DA is. We're going to have the same outcome either way. We also learned that nearly 4 in 10 voters didn't know that DAs were elected, right? And that one didn't surprise us. That sort of was part of this reason why we wanted to launch the campaign. And so that sort of validated that initial hunch that we had and drove home for us, the reason why we needed to do this. We also learned from this poll that voters are much more likely to pay attention to a DA election after hearing facts about their power and autonomy. So after people who were polled learned a little bit more about what the role and power of the DA was, they were much more likely to pay attention to the next DA election. And so between all of these things, right, this really validated our desire to do this campaign. And yes, this is the right moment to go out there and start talking about the role of the district attorney. And then this is the last poll slide that I wanted to show you, because I think this one is really interesting and really important. So what we learned is that voters see a commitment to racial justice as a more important quality in a DA than experience as a prosecutor. And so we think that racial justice is an important quality in a DA, and it was really interesting and important to see that that resonated across the board. And so you can see here in this chart that 79% of people named a commitment to racial justice as an important quality versus 65% of people who named experience as a prosecutor. And so we think that's an important message to folks who are considering running for office, that racial justice does matter to people in our state, and that will, that could affect your campaign, as you run for office. All right, so with that, I'm gonna turn it back to Whitney to dive in on these sort of specific things that a DA does so that we can understand the real scope of what they have the power to do. Thanks
so much, Liv. And just wanted to see here if there's anything pressing on the last. I see that there's some stuff in the Q&A that are general that we'll get to, but just wanted to make sure everybody feels good and up to date of where we are. Please do not hesitate, to throw in the chat, and Liv and others will be following that. But as I said, and as we named it, what a difference a DA does make. Like, what is the power of this individual who is elected, who is accountable to nobody, and who runs these offices? Well, I want to go through this very extensive list here and kind of talk about all of the decisions that individual DAs get to make, and that these are not structural or by policy or by law, they're by individual choice. So first, charging decisions. When anybody, the first thing that happens when somebody is brought into the system, the district attorney decides whether or not to charge them. They can look at a myriad of different things that the police bring, or ideas that the police say, we think this person did this, but ultimately it's up to the district attorney. So there's a lot of places. So for example, if somebody comes in, especially like with a substance abuse or mental health issue, maybe that district attorney can decide to divert them to a community-based treatment center instead of kicking them and actually doing a criminal charge. Right from the beginning, DAs can say, I'm not going to charge, and get that person out of the system. If the person has done something and the DA is like, well, no, we need to move forward, because there are situations where you need to move forward with criminal charges. But then are there enhancements, or are you adding things? For example, are you going to add a gun charge or a drug possession charge? Are you going to look at the location and say, oh, that person possessed drugs in a school zone, which adds sentencing enhancements? Remembering, not remembering what I want to share with you, for example, is a school zone and what its definition is, which is any building where young people can be gathered or taught, basically. So a church basement where there's a pre-K program counts as a school zone. We know for a fact in the city of Boston, the only place that is not a school zone is the tarmac at Logan. So if the DA in Suffolk County wants to put a sentencing enhancement of a school zone, they could do it on almost every person that is possessing drugs. And that's an additional 2 years mandatory minimum sentence, where an individual cannot get treatment or services many times and has to serve that extra time. And then there's, as you can imagine, a myriad of things. Is somebody trespassing? Is that another add? It's because the more charges you add, the longer the sentence can get. So right there, those decisions are made. The next piece, if the individual is getting charged criminally, should they be given bail, or should they be held at a jail? That is up to the district attorney as well. The district attorney not only gets to decide to say, we want to hold them on bail, they get to request the level of bail. So right here, it is a decision based on somebody, whether or not they're going to reoffend, but also their a level of poverty. They could set a bail so high, so it's like, oh, well, we're not going to keep you in. You can make bail. But if they set the bail so high, a poor person couldn't make it anyway. So they're just going to be caught, left in the jail. And so bail is something else. And, studies again and again have proven, when people are in their communities surrounded by, their support system and all of those things, they're going to have a lot more luck in life than sitting in a house of correction for months, years, waiting for a trial. Leveraging guilty pleas. So this is plea bargaining. It's one of the things that we see a lot of district attorneys not having to go to trial, because if they dump a bunch of charges on somebody, you have defendants that get nervous and are like, I can't spend 20 years in prison, so I'll plea and say that I'm guilty to a lower crime, so I don't have to take a chance with the jury and only make 5 years. So what we're basically doing now is asking defendants to play, roulette with their own, lives. And even if they're not guilty, thinking that the odds are in their favor if they plead guilty, so they might not get that harshest sentence. Civil asset forfeiture. That's when, and unfortunately here in Massachusetts, we have one of the worst laws on asset forfeiture in the country. We've actually been given an F every year for the last decade by a national group that compares. And so this is because in Massachusetts, you do not have to be charged or you do not have to be convicted with a crime for the police or the district attorney to take your assets. So if I'm driving and I just took out a bunch of money to pay my rent in cash, and I'm driving my car and I get stopped on a taillight and they see a bunch of cash in my car, they might go, oh, why do you have so much cash? And you have a broken taillight. And I don't like your look. I think you might be a drug dealer, but until we figure it out, I'm going to keep your cash in your car while we're figuring out whether or not you've done anything. Those are all decisions that the district attorney can be part of doing that job. Police accountability. When we have a bad actor police officer, who's going to charge them? Who decides whether or not to go after them? It's the district attorney. And, and that's the place where we're seeing a lot of problems because, police and district attorneys work very close together. So that's not a very good check and balance of the system, is it? If you don't want to, upset your partner, so the DAs don't want to upset the police and the police don't want to upset the DAs. And so then what happens is you have bad actors that are not getting prosecuted for their bad deeds. Data collection, I will talk about this more, but once again, as I said, there's no structure, there's no system. And when you have to go and beg and plead for data to figure out how our system is working, because you cannot manage what you do not measure. And how are we as voters in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts supposed to figure out how our elected officials who are supposed to be serving us are doing their job if we can't even measure their job because we don't have the data?
Whitney,
Sentencing.
do you mind if I interrupt you for a second here?
Go ahead.
There are a few questions in the chat that I think might be relevant to the things that you're saying. And so, this might be a data collection issue, and so I'm not sure we have the answer to this, but there was a question about, what the plea bargaining rates are in Barnstable courts. Is that data that we have somewhere?
That is
hard to find?
That is data that's very, very hard to find. We are actually, just so folks know, we are starting to look at hopefully a continued relationship with the trial courts, because we actually have a trial court system that's supposed to oversee all the courts, and that's where the data collection is supposed to be coming through. So it is a great question. It is one that we would all like to be able to look up and answer, and it is one that we are looking on. But it is also something that when we get into accountability for your elected officials, it is completely fair for constituents to go to their DA and go, we would love to see your numbers, and ask about things such as plea bargaining. Is there another one, Liv?
Yeah, there's one around whether or not DAs determine probable cause before making charging decisions or whether the police determine that. This person is from Connecticut and says that there the courts determine probable cause based on the police reports.
Yeah, I mean, probable cause is something that's decided, right? I mean, that's how most systems work is, there needed to be a reason for this individual to be put in handcuffs in the first place, right? And so
Yep.
that's when you start living with the doctrine of probable cause of what was their reason and what was the reason and was it good for that person to end up in custody in the first place and then to be put in front of a district attorney and a judge for possible charges.
Thanks, Whitney. And I'm just going to throw you one more that's in the chat here. Do you think that if police departments used a community policing model in law enforcement as opposed to models currently used, would that contribute to a fairer and more equitable system for all people?
I personally think that community models are the best models because we're there in our society holding each other accountable. However, I hate making blanket statements. Because and this is why, it's so important to pay attention to what's happening in your county and in your community, because community policing can work very well, but it needs to make sure that it has the structures and that it has the support in place. A lot of people say, oh, we do community policing. In Boston, they say that the Boston Police Department does community policing. I live in Boston and visit most of the communities, and I think most of us would not agree with that. So first off, it's the definition, but yes, the importance of it, and I think the importance of community policing is, once again, accountability and transparency. How is our system working in our community? Secondly, what then are the biggest problems in our community that we need to be putting more resources into? Do we have a sex trade, or is it mental health? Or is it drug addiction? Is it all of the above? So really seeing what the needs of the community are when building that. But then once again, you need the commitment of the leaders of the criminal legal system to be part of that. Because if community policing happens and then you have a DA going, oh, well, you're not bringing anybody for me to sentence or to charge or whatever, and there's problems, they could say, we need more, information and more ability to charge people, and maybe the community policing model isn't getting them that. But I think the important thing is that we need to, yes, invest in having the discussion around community policing, but then we need to take it to the next level of beyond the vocabulary and go, what does that actually mean? What are we going to put into practice in community policing? And there's lots of different models out there. Right now, a model that's been very popular, and we're still seeing the data coming back on it now, is having non-police response units to mental health and substance abuse 911 calls. So if they can figure out that this is a mental health crisis, there's a substance abuse crisis, maybe you send somebody with that expertise before sending somebody whose only option is handcuffs or a gun. And no fault of the police. I mean, that's what they're trained for. That's what they do. So who we send out there and who the community determines to send out there is very important.
Thanks, Whitney. We do have some other questions, but I'm going to let you get back to it, and we'll circle back to some of these at the end. And just want to remind folks, it can be hard for us to keep track of some of the questions that are coming in through the comments, so I encourage you to use the Q&A feature.
Great. And I just wanted to finish sentencing recommendations. It's up there, this very similar with charging decisions. When a district attorney says, I'm going for the full sentence, that's what the court has to start with. That's kind of where the negotiations start. So DAs can start places. And I can say this now, in 2006, I was involved with running a district attorney challenger against an incumbent in Berkshire County. So other end of the Commonwealth, none of us will get in trouble talking about this. We're not going to get in trouble anyway. But and I was running the challenger, and one of the things that came out in that campaign, per the sitting DA himself, in one of his talking points, was that district attorney went for the maximum sentence in every case, regardless of the circumstances. And that's not how we should be operating as a society. Is always context. There's always circumstances. There's always a story, and there's always a human. There's always a person and their family and their community involved with that. So sentencing recommendations are really important, and it is a power within the district attorney's office to make those recommendations and look at it and take into the fact context. Immigration is another area. While that's a federal program, district attorneys, as soon as somebody gets a criminal charge, then that can notify ICE, and if they're in the middle of status or don't have status, that can cause many, many problems for them. It also can be part of, if the district attorney is in a courthouse and there are people in the courthouse and they call ICE. We've had this issue actually happen in several courthouses across Massachusetts, where somebody in the courthouse kind of dropped a dime on somebody to ICE. And the person wasn't in there for anything dangerous or weird, but they called ICE, and then all of a sudden ICE is picking up immigrants at the courthouse. So guess what's going to happen with that? Immigrants whose status might be in question, or who are in the process of getting their status, if they're called to a courthouse or they're called to do something, even as a witness to a crime that somebody else committed or witnessed, they're not going to show up because they don't feel safe. And then finally, appeals. Appeals are a place when individuals can appeal their sentence. If they get convicted and they go, you know what, there was a problem with this trial. And, we've all watched enough Law and Order, which unfortunately is nothing like the system works, except for the fact that there is an appeals process. And we hear all the time, well, I'm going to appeal. The fact is a district attorney can go, go ahead and appeal, and I'm not going to fight it. And so I just wanted to, so I know I've spoken for a very long time here, but these are all individual decision points that individual district attorneys can make, and it's completely up to them. So as you can see, they are the driver and the builder of our criminal legal system and how we respond to individuals in the criminal legal system. So you being here tonight is so amazing and so exciting, because these are individuals that only you, the voters, can keep accountable. Transparency and accountability. Oh, you still get me. I still get to keep talking. Aren't I awesome? I'm going to slow down. What I'll do is I'll run through this a little quicker, but I really wanted to set that to make sure that we have enough time. But there are issues that when we work with district attorneys' offices, that all the time that you're in that they have control over and you want to do. So public records requests, as we were talking before, a district attorney can go, yes, here, and share it. Or they can go, no, we're not going to share it. Sue us for it. And then we sue them for it, and they're like, oh, okay, the court told us we have to do it, but it's going to cost us $1 million to make all those photocopies. You all would not believe how many times the ACLU has gotten $1 million bill for something, and then we have to go back and go, yeah, no, we're not paying $1 million, and the court goes, yeah, no, that's stupid. But at every point, they could just say, hey, here's the data, it's yours, I work for you. So public records request, the data collection, as I said, do folks even keep the data? And do they keep it? And do they keep it the same way? Now, we know district attorneys have a statewide organization, the Massachusetts District Attorneys Association. So they even themselves could decide proactively to standardize all their data. But that's not something that is happening. Racial disparities, as I mentioned before, we are not even tracking race in our data. So what we're all doing is living with this horrible feeling that you all click the button to, that I would have clicked the button on, which is, yes, people are treated differently depending on the color of their skin. But how are we supposed to approve this when they're not even collecting data on race? Mental health issues, again, are we charging people for a sickness? Mental health, substance abuse, aren't there ways that we could divert people into systems? Civil asset forfeiture, again, the way the current law works in Massachusetts is the only oversight of asseted funds and of any assets, money, boats, cars, property, houses, they take it all. Is there supposed to be a report every year from the district attorney's office to the Senate clerk? I get to have the fun of going and looking at those reports every year. And literally, some of them will A, not do a report, or B, if they do a report, it will be like, oh, we spent $1 million on training. And that's all it'll say. So, once again, another system that DAs could be part of helping fix the civil asset forfeiture system, or at least making it transparent, but they don't. I don't know if you all had any opportunity to read about the drug lab scandal, about over 40,000 people were released from custody, little ACLU lawsuit that we did. Well, that was because we had chemists in our drug labs who were testing drugs, or actually they weren't testing drugs, and they were giving the assistant district attorneys and district attorneys reports that they wanted. And we proved in hundreds and thousands of cases that chemists would just say, the DA would go, that needs to be cocaine. And they go, okay, it's cocaine, check. And so that's why actually we had over 40,000 people either have their sentences reversed, or they were released because they were actually still doing time. And you can check that out at aclum.org. It's a lawsuit that keeps giving. We can continue to have cases and find horrible problems with the system. And then finally, in transparency and accountability, community engagement. This is one of the things that we love for our communities that are really committed to what a difference the DA makes to follow up with. You elected this individual to be your district attorney. You can ask for community meetings. You can demand for communities and sit downs. And that was one of the, and this is an area that we really hope that as we work with voters to get excited about really making sure that there is an honest, open dialogue in your district attorney race, that whoever gets that office, wins that election, that you continue to follow up and demand that community engagement. Next slide, Liv. Is there anything happening in the chat or Q&A that we should pause for?
Yeah, just because we've been talking a lot about data collection, there's a question about which office is ultimately accountable to change some of the data collection and transparency issues that we talked about.
That's a great, because that's the problem. There's no standardization. So that's why what we're hoping is that we need to we're working on statewide legislation to create standardization in data. That's why we also hope that maybe the trial courts could be one place where that is at least a body that is already in existence that oversees how all of the trial courts operate, that could be a place where the data is drugged out. And we've had multiple conversations with the folks over at the trial courts and how they're trying to figure out that system. But you're right. I mean, there is no one place where all of the criminal legal system data is saying, like, here are our rules and here are how we do it. That's why we're hoping to have a full-on government data transparency bill that's currently we're working on in the legislature to try and do that. But there is no body to go to right now for one standardization of anything, of trying to collect data. Is there anything else, Liv?
Thanks, Whitney. There's a question about what we mean, what exactly does rehabilitation comprise, right? That's a word that comes up a lot. What kind of programs or policies might fall under that umbrella?
Well, that's a great question. And this is why getting down to individuals, because rehabilitation is going to be dependent on what the individual needs, right? But when we think about rehabilitation, the first things we need to do is the individual, like mental health and substance abuse services. We need the individual to be functioning. To then able to then, take the next step of contributing, right, into our society, into our communities. So when I talk about rehabilitation, and I've worked in programs in states all across the country talking about rehabilitation, we really need to expand our definition. So everything from parenting classes, job training, English classes, basic taking care of oneself. There's a lot of folks out there that don't know basic things like, how to budget, or, how to make sure their bills are paid, or to sign leases and all that stuff. So when we talk about rehabilitation, what we really need to do, and the fact is we don't have to invent the services. What we need to do is make sure, instead of taking these individuals who need help and putting them behind bars, what we need to do is to divert them to the people that know social services and know rehabilitation, so they can work with the individual. That's one of the other issues that we've seen, especially when people tout, oh well, we're gonna have treatment within correction facilities, or we're going to work with this one treatment program and everybody has to go there. Everybody is different. That's why, when you think about rehabilitation and somebody taking care of themselves and being a healthy and better person, think of yourself when you're not feeling well and you just want to go in, you have a head cold and you go into the CVS. There is sorry, I almost swore. There's an entire aisle of medications that you can use for your cold. But if you are suffering from dual diagnosis, mental health, and substance abuse, there's one program and there's a waiting list for it, right? So what we need to do is, and what we've seen is the vocabulary has changed, right? People are doing the talk, but nobody's walking the walk yet. And that's where we need to get, not only in these elections with district attorneys, but the elections with everybody. We want to see the budget numbers behind those narratives. You can talk a good game about wanting to support treatment and mental health services, but if you continue to pass budgets that don't fund them, you're just, it's just lip service. And that's what we're still getting. Part of me, I've been doing this for so long, I want to take the little bit of win that at least they've started changing their vocabulary, but they can't stop there. And unfortunately, that's what happens. Talking about racial disparities, I want to lay out a little bit for you here in Massachusetts. And again, remember, our data is horrible. So I have collected this from multiple sources, two of the biggest ones being a Harvard report that was prepared for the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, as well as working with as the group that I said, the Prison Policy Initiative out of Northampton. But people think that it's not a problem here in Massachusetts, or at least some people don't. Many of us do. The incarcerated population of Blacks and Latino, incarcerated Blacks and Latinos make up 17% of the Massachusetts population. They make up over 50% of the incarcerated population. And let me tell you, and just remind everybody right now, no one race or group of any type of people commits crimes at a higher level than any other. Racial and ethnic differences count about for 70% of the disparities in sentencing. So let me say that a little bit differently, a little more simply. When you look at differences, like Liv and I committed the same crime, but we got 2 different sentences. That's a sentencing disparity. And if you look at sentencing disparity, 70% of them, people of color, get longer sentences for the same exact crime. Black and Latino people are way more likely to be sent to a superior court. So this is a decision by the police and then a charging decision by DAs. So sent to superior court where the sentences are longer, then be sent to a district court. So once again, that's an escalation. You can make a decision to send somebody to district court versus superior court. Black and Latino people are charged with drugs and weapons more often and end up with higher sentences than white people on a regular basis. So what we're seeing is those things that I talked about before, like what decisions are DAs making, those enhancements happen to people of color way more often than white people. And Black and Latino are charged with mandatory minimums and are more likely to serve longer sentences than white people. Once again, we don't have exact numbers, but this is what Harvard and the trial courts were able to put together by looking at everything and figuring out how to compare apples to apples. One day it would be great so I could give you, like, there were 400 people that did this. We're not there yet. If the ACLU has something to do with it, we will be, but we're not there yet. On bail, once again, we have seen the racial disparities, who's held on bail and who isn't. White people are granted bail at a much higher rate than people of color, and bail is lower. And because bail, once again, the criminal legal system, so much as we do, is not just about making sure we have a safe and healthy society. The structure and the structural racism and sexism within our criminal legal system is what now leads to it to be about control. And so bail is control. It's like, you know what? I want to control you. You're not going to get bail. You're going to sit behind these bars. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your family, and you're going to sit there and wait for trial. And that's about control. Continuance without a finding is a benefit. So basically they can sit in court and go, yeah, you were charged, whatever. But so it's basically kind of like a diversion. So it's in between. DAs can choose not to charge at all if there's a charge, but then the kind of go back and forth, they can do a continuance without a finding, which means the person is basically released, and they can move on with their life without a conviction on their record, which then leads to CORI, criminal offender record information, which we could do a whole nother webinar on. But that's the system in which, people can, whether or not they get jobs or other things in the world, people can look up their records and have access to that. And then finally, as I talked about a little bit more, diversion. DAs can make, as I said, divert somebody to a community program, divert somebody to treatment, and what we know is that white defendants get diverted out of the criminal legal system at a much higher rate than defendants of color. As I said, what this came from was a very long and intensive set of research done by Harvard, working with the Supreme Judicial Court. So I'm sorry that I can't give exact numbers to this, but I will say that I am very confident that of the source and the scientific significance of this study, and that it really is reflecting of who we are in Massachusetts. Next slide. Does anybody have any questions, or we can all just do a group scream if we want?
There are some questions here, Whitney. There's one which I think is timely for us. What is the relation, if any, between DA and sheriff?
That's great. Nothing technically at all, except sheriffs are the ones that run our houses of correction, our jails, and they do some other work, and so they house folks. And so there is a relationship that sheriffs house people pre and post trial, and and folks that have a sentence of under 2 years are there. But there isn't too much other than them being like the like one after each other in the kind of criminal legal conveyor belt. And they work that way. But what's really important is, once again, these are two elected leaders of the criminal legal system in your community. So their narrative, their tone, how they approach things is very, very important. And it is something that, especially if you can get a sheriff and a DI and a district attorney thinking the same way, it can make or break, what your community wants to do. We have Massachusetts has a very famous sheriff in our mix. I don't know if you all are familiar with Sheriff Hodgins down in Bristol County, our buddy there, but just to remind you, this is the kind gentleman that was willing to send all of his prisoners to the border to build the wall for Trump. Yeah, I'm sorry, I just saw the ugh. Yes. So, imagine, and so that's the tone and tenor of the criminal legal system in Bristol County, and the district attorney down there is very much the same. So while they're partners in how the criminal legal system runs, I think it's very important, especially because those are two offices that are only accountable to voters, and that can set the tone and the narrative, and of how the system runs and what the community can expect.
Thanks, Whitney. We do have some more questions, but I think I would love for you to get to this slide, and I'm happy to to chime in here as well, because I think folks are probably wondering what they can do about all of this, right? That's probably part of the reason that you're here.
Right.
So let's get to this slide, but then we'll come back to the questions.
Great. So communication. So one of the most things, and you all are here. So, one of these things, everything that I'm going to say, I think I'm going to add the caveat to this amazing group of people that showed up tonight, which is, and then invite 2 people, right? So monitoring local press is very important. You can see, district attorneys get out there and they talk about what is important to them, what their thought process and what their vision of their office is. They talk about it in the press. Do they, and so monitoring, see what the tone and the tenor, and you can very often get an idea of how your district attorney is operating by what he lifts up in the press and see how horrible I am, what they lift up in the press or not. So just monitoring and watching and feeling a tone and having those conversations, because I think as we saw by the poll, so many people go, oh, district attorney doesn't have anything to do with me. That's not the case. And so if we keep these conversations and we make it more normalized, just like when we talk about president and that we all need to go out and vote for president, district attorneys have a way bigger impact on your everyday life than the president does, except for like maybe your mental health and what you watch on Twitter. We're nonpartisan, non-comedy. Request a meeting with your day. This is something that I talked about a little bit before. District attorneys, and we've worked with several community groups that have requested and now get regular meetings to check in with district attorneys. And very often it's great. We've had coalitions of folks, everybody who work, especially if you have folks from organizations that actually work with folks that are criminal legal system involved. And then you have, leaders of your community, you have interested and concerned voters, and everybody come in and you have a regular meeting to talk about maybe what you just read in the press or a trend that you may see in the office of DA or those. So, or just a place where if you're working on something, there's a regular place to have that interaction. And once again, since the DA is elected, this is something, now I'm not saying that all DAs make it easy to get one, and it's not. But then, and then there's things that you can do, like, oh, should, we be talking about this elected official refuses to meet with constituents? That could be a fun little campaign to do. Public records requests. As I have told you all, the data collection here is horrible, but we can do it. And I know Liv is gonna share. There's actually a Cape and Islands public records request form that we're gonna share with you. So you don't need to have all the lawyers at the ACLU, at least to start dipping your toe into the water to figure out, can we get this information? And then if you keep getting stonewalled, that's when you reach out to your friends at a place like the ACLU to be like, we've tried. And we can't. And then finally, I think it's always really good to build a vehicle for folks to have these discussions around. So if you want to build a campaign about bringing more mental health services to the Cape, and I know you all do, as I have family that have been in the mental health system on Cape Cod. That's something that you can do and you can talk about in your campaign to bring more mental health. Go, what, one of the pillars of our campaign is we want our district attorney to start diverting all individuals with underlying mental health issues. And if they're not going to divert them, they need to have a really good reason why. Because especially when you're talking about mental health and substance abuse, there are so many crimes that stem from them. Trespassing, small petty thefts or crimes, sale of small amounts of drugs, not small drugs, small amounts of drugs. So much of this is just to maintain one's mental health or addiction, or self-medication for individuals suffering from mental health issues. So building a campaign around something that you want to see changed is then also a way to go, and where does the district attorney fit in this change we want to see, and call them to it and make that part of the campaign. So those are just some ideas beyond organizing when it's time for a district attorney to be elected, which is of course what we're all sitting here and educating ourselves on now, since you guys have the first opportunity in 20 years for an actual open race and a full debate since it's an open seat.
Thanks, Whitney. I'm going to move us on to the next slide just because we keep talking about the public records request. This is the form. We can maybe pop it in the chat afterwards, but this is the form that Whitney was talking about on the Massachusetts website about doing a public records request for the Cape and Islands. And so if you're feeling fired up about that, this is a good place to start. I am mindful of time. I want to make sure we get to questions at the end. So I'm going to move us through this a little bit quickly, but this is sort of the last interactive question on here that we wanted to pose for all of you. And that's, what issues do you care about as it relates to the criminal legal system? And I think we're getting a sense of that from the comments and the questions. But part of our reason for asking this is, of course, to sort of tie it back to the influence of the DA. So if everyone wants to take a moment and answer this question using the Mentimeter function, I'm going to put into the chat again the direct link that you all can use to access this question. This one is open-ended, so you can sort of type in there as much or as little as you want to.
And we don't judge on grammar or spelling.
That's right.
And this is okay. Oh, good.
No, I was just going to say, if you're having trouble with the link I put in the chat, the directions to access it are also on the top of the slide here. You've got the general URL and the access code.
And I love, while you guys are typing, I just want to comment, we didn't even get into a discussion on the juvenile justice system and all of the places where there's influence there. And then, of course, added on to all the other problems that with the legal system, when you have women in the system, like so many things in this country and in the world, our systems were built never with women in mind. So everything from the services we provide, if folks actually get diverted into services, to the needs of women if they are incarcerated are unbelievably ridiculous, including the amounts of money that women are charged and get into debt for menstruation needs while incarcerated. So racial disparity, mental health resources to those in trouble, love this. Abolishing the police, love that conversation. It's a very hot conversation right now. I'm saying that I love and ACLU is not in a position, we're not abolitionists, but I just love the conversation is a great conversation. Diversion, root causes. I'm so that it's wonderful to see, you guys are caring about the ills, and it looks like we have a really good group of voters to lead some peer voter education on district attorneys and their power here. Immigrants as well, yeah. And it is and racist issue, but one of the things that is very interesting, and I don't know if you all remember from the slides that Liv originally did, and this is Massachusetts based, but I was very interested in when we did our statewide poll, that I think it wasn't, forgive me, I'm not exact, but it was 89% of people thought you were treated differently depending on who you know. And 84% of people thought you were treated differently because of the color of your skin. And so it's just interesting. So here in Massachusetts, we still cannot completely swallow that reality of racism and the structural racism that is in our system, that our systems were built in. So prisoners treated with dignity. Oh, thank you so much. We need to remember, it's only like 0.001% of inmates that don't return to their community. Our neighbors are coming back We need to make sure that they're treated okay so we can help them come back and be productive members. Justice, love it. I would love to start using the word justice as well. Oh, yeah, the public does not. And you're right. Once again, this is about what's going on in jails and conditions and all of that. So again, when we start asking the questions, and then when we realize that two of like sheriffs and DAs are elected, we have some leverage as constituents there to start trying to find out more of these things. 287G agreement in Barnstable County. I'm calling out the safe communities of Cape Cod. You're awesome. Love that. And yes, we're with you. We're going to end 287G.
Thank you all for sharing all of these many issues that you are following and concerned about in the criminal legal system. I'm going to move us on to the next slide, which is related. But if folks want to keep putting into the chat box some of these issues that we care about, we'd love to for folks to keep sharing and having that conversation.
So we just wanted to talk about a little bit, end this with the influence of district attorneys, not just on the criminal legal system, but on the politics and the policies of Massachusetts. As I said, there is a Massachusetts District Attorneys Association, which in fact actually gets a budget line item from the state legislature to exist. I think that is appalling that the state pays for people to have a lobbyist. They don't pay for the ACLU to have a lobbyist. They don't pay for the League of Women Voters to have a lobbyist. But anyway, so they have the Massachusetts District Attorneys Association, who are very active in Massachusetts politics. So legislatively, I can't name the last, there has never been a time when the ACLU has moved forward in some sort of criminal legal type of legislation that the district attorneys have not come in and weighed in against us. And not only do they come in and weigh in, but because they're elected officials themselves, we have 13 individuals who have more influence than the vast majority of all of us voters put together in the state house. Because when the DA say something about the criminal legal system, we're still living in the worlds of the war on drugs and tough on crime and all of that. So when the DA say something, a huge number of legislators just listen and don't question. Same thing happens at the executive level, in the governor's office and the executive office of public safety. So, which we call EOPS. Once again, district attorneys and their association are in there, and they're always at every table, every time. It was very interesting. It was shared that before I joined the ACLU, I ran the marijuana decriminalization campaign that was successful in 2008. And just what that did was make sure, decriminalize. People weren't, no handcuffs, no whatever. The District Attorneys Association decided that this was going to be their they decided that they were going to go all in against this campaign. And it was me and a couple of other folks, but the DA's Association, so not only did they go all in on it, they decided that everywhere I went for a debate or whatever, that the DA was going to be the person I debated on this issue, on this ballot question. And so, right there, they have built in, I have to go to every county, they have an individual there. Well, it ends up that at the time, DA O'Keefe happened to be the president of the Massachusetts District Attorneys Association. And Mr. O'Keefe was really against marijuana decriminalization. And he and I spent 3 months together. I think we debated each other well over 40 times. He followed me around the state, and every TV show, radio show, debate, I'd show up. If it wasn't the local DA, it was Michael. And I was joking with him that year, I spent more time with Michael than I did my father. But this was the power of the DA's Association and the decision they made to put all of those resources to fight the marijuana decriminalization initiative, which, by the way, won by 68%, the largest win of any ballot initiative in the history of Massachusetts, or close to the largest win. I think somebody else beat us out. But anyway, so just wanted to share that. And then, local issues, DAs and assistant DAs, if there's an ordinance or something that wants to be passed, especially in larger cities that have to do with policing or have to do with other issues, DAs are very, very influential. And both ways. I think hopefully all of you, recognized and saw what Rachel Rollins decided to do when she was voted in to run Suffolk County. She started working with the city of Boston and all those people in Suffolk County about what the vision that she had for what district attorneys should look like. And it had a huge impact on local politics, on how local police were doing their job, because why would they run around and arrest all of these people for low-level offenses if the DA wasn't going to do any charges? So there's a huge impact and influence that these individuals have in the political sphere, in addition to the daily impact on the criminal legal system.
Thanks, Whitney. We're going to return now to the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get through as many questions as we can. If we don't get to your question, Whitney and I will put our email addresses in the chat box after this. You can always feel free to reach out to us and use us as a resource. We've got a question here that says, what power does the state attorney have over the district attorneys?
The attorney general?
I'm not sure. I'm gonna guess that that's what they meant, but if that person wants to correct us in the chat, please feel free to do that.
Yes. So the attorney general, once again, there's no power over. They don't report to the attorney general. However, the attorney general can step in if they think that there's misconduct or other issues happening within not only district attorneys' offices, but also on individual cases. So the attorney general can step in if a district attorney's office decides not to charge a police officer, but then the AG can come in and there's ways that they can do it. So there's ways that the AG can step in and try and influence, but it's very much in a kind of stick way that they would have to actually start some sort of process versus, like DAs going, oh, that's my boss and I'm just going to get a talking to. That doesn't happen.
Thanks, Whitney. Someone popped into the chat that they thought that might have meant U.S. attorney in reference to Rachel Rollins, who's recently stepped into that role. Go ahead.
There's going to be once again, that could be the same thing. The U.S. attorney, if the attorney general isn't doing anything, or there's DAs, the U.S. attorneys can sometimes have purview to look into a situation and be like, is this a problem? Do we need to deal with it? But once again, it's not like it's automatic. They don't work for her, but that is something that we talk about at the ACLU. Both the attorney general and the U.S. attorneys do have the capability of deciding to lean in on and look at issues of problems of how offices are run, or especially if there's issues of systemic, racism and problems of that nature.
Great, thanks. There is a question, and I'm not sure we know off the top of our head, but what bills might be pending in the legislature about civil asset forfeiture, or how we might address that?
I actually just got, there is a bill pending right now, and I wrote it down. So there's something that's pending right now. We're waiting. It's waiting for its conference committee right now. So we're waiting for the results to see what the final language looks like. But so there is a vehicle. It is moving. It was just, I think it got its extension from the committee because we also, I won't go down that road. Bills need to get an extension if we want to keep working on them past February. It got an extension. So we're waiting to see the language. It should be coming out soon, actually, to see how we're going to support it. But as I said, Massachusetts asset forfeiture law is so bad, like any improvement is going to be good. But our problem is the way Massachusetts runs is if the legislature does anything, it then goes, oh, we're not going to work on this. We fixed it. So, I always am very careful not to say victory if we only get a small piece of something, because I'm going to go back for the whole thing. And I don't want the legislature to think that they've solved the problem because they did a little step.
And I'll put my email in the box, Whitney. If that person wants to follow up with me, we'll get the bill number for you.
Yeah.
If you're interested in tracking it. There were a couple of questions just about timeline for pulling papers for office.
I saw that.
And when those are due. And so I thought maybe we could end with that question. I want to be mindful of time, and we can move into our wrap up.
Yes. So what we're seeing now is folks are announcing and putting together their exploratory committees. I believe it's called pulling your papers to get your signatures to be office should be, I think it's February. Is it February 2nd? It's coming up really soon. But then you need to get your signatures in, and you have until the last Tuesday in May to get those papers in. So this year, that's May 31st. So people can, and I believe for DA, I think it's 300 signatures, but none of the offices require that many signatures, very honestly. Oh, is it 1,000? Thank you, Donna. Oh, of course, that because it's a county-wide office. See, that's the other problem, just to remind folks that sheriffs and DAs are the only county-wide government that exists anymore in Massachusetts. We don't have county government anymore. So we have DAs and sheriffs whose territories are these counties, but that's why they're up to 1,000. So thank you so much, Donna, for sharing that. But those papers will be due the last Tuesday in May, which is the 31st.
All right. If we didn't get a chance to get to your question, please feel free to reach out to us. I'll put we'll put our email addresses in the chat box. I just want to pull up here a list of all of the wonderful partner organizations who helped put this event on tonight. On this slide, you can find their Facebook pages and their email addresses. Perhaps you might want to take a screenshot of it to save it for later. But I just want to say, this is an incredible partnership that has come together on the Cape and Islands. And so if you are, local and you are not yet connected to one of these organizations, please reach out. They're doing a lot of incredible work, and they're really going to be your sort of lifeline, to organizing. And so really encourage you to do that. This was a phenomenal night. It was so great to see so many people here and sticking through with us all the way through the hour and a half after what I'm sure was a long day of work for everybody. And so we hope that you found this presentation worthwhile. We look forward to seeing how we can support the work that you are doing, on the Cape and Islands moving forward. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Karen to close us out.
Thank you, Olivia. We hope that you've enjoyed tonight's presentation. I'm Karen Bachukas from the MLK Action Team of the Nauset Interfaith Association. I will conclude this evening's program with a few very brief comments to thank the people and the organizations that made tonight's program possible. First, many thanks to our speakers from the ACLU Massachusetts branch, Whitney Taylor and Olivia Santoro, for the important educational work that they do and for sharing it with us tonight. With the recent retirement announcement by the Cape and Islands incumbent district attorney and at least 2 candidates announcing their intention to run, this education program could not have been more timely. A special thanks to our co-sponsoring organizations, the League of Women Voters of Martha's Vineyard, the NAACP of Martha's Vineyard, the NAACP Cape Cod chapter, the Coalition for Safe Cape Cod Communities, and the MLK Action Team of the Nauset Interfaith Association. And also to Jean Morrison, the Vice President of Programs with the League of Women Voters Cape Cod area, for spearheading this event and reaching out to tonight's program co-sponsors to make it a collaborative effort. Thank you too to the League of Women Voters Cape Cod area for hosting the webinar, and to Richard Ott, Communications Chair, for running the technical aspects of the evening. Finally, and most importantly, we would like to thank all of you who joined us this evening to learn about the role and responsibilities of the district attorneys and how voters can hold them accountable. We're very glad that you're here, and we hope that you will recommend the program to friends and colleagues who can view the recording on the League of Women Voters Cape Cod area Facebook page and the websites of the partner organizations soon. Please be an informed voter. Continue to engage by following this election and future public forums where voters can ask the candidates about their plans for accountability. Most of all, please vote in your local elections in November. Thank you all and good night.